The last thing Mark remembered was the sudden screech of tires, a flash of blinding light, and then an abrupt, all-consuming darkness. He had been cycling home from a late-night photography shoot, a familiar route through the city's quiet backstreets. One moment, the cool night air was on his face. The next, a crushing impact. His world dissolved into a vast, silent void. When Mark finally awoke, it was not with a jolt, but a slow, gradual surfacing from a deep, murky ocean. Sounds were muffled, shapes blurred. He felt a dull ache that permeated his entire being, a heavy lethargy pinning him to a soft, unfamiliar bed. A nurse, her face kind but serious, leaned over him. Her words were gentle, but their meaning hit him like a physical blow. "You've been in a coma, Mark. 3 weeks." She explained the accident, the severe head trauma, the broken leg. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "Your fiancée, Sarah, hasn't visited." His mind, still foggy from the trauma and medication, struggled to process this. Sarah, his Sarah, the woman he had planned to spend his life with, the woman who, he believed, loved him fiercely. The absence of her face at his bedside, the lack of her comforting touch, was a stark, chilling reality. A hollow space began to form in his chest, an emptiness more profound than the physical pain. Mark, a freelance photographer at 38, prided himself on his keen eye, his ability to see what others missed, to capture the nuanced emotions in a single frame. Yet, in the weeks leading up to the accident, he realized now with a sickening clarity, he had been blind to the shifting landscape of his own life. Sarah and he had been together for 5 years. Their loft apartment in the bustling heart of the city was their sanctuary, filled with art, books, and the quiet hum of their shared life. They had dreams, big, vibrant dreams of opening a small, independent photography gallery, a space where Mark could showcase his work and foster emerging local talent. Their finances were intertwined, their joint account the vessel for their shared aspirations, the wedding fund, and their life savings. In retrospect, the subtle changes had been there, like faint shadows in a well-lit room. 3 months prior, a quiet disquiet had settled over their relationship. Sarah, who worked in marketing for a tech startup, had grown increasingly secretive with her phone, often excusing herself to take calls or texts in another room. She laughed at messages from a new work friend she never introduced him to, a certain Chad, who apparently had an endless supply of amusing anecdotes. She started buying expensive new clothes, designer handbags he knew were well beyond their agreed-upon budget. Mark, ever the optimist, had dismissed these as stress. Wedding planning was demanding, her job was demanding. He told himself it was just a phase, a temporary ripple in the otherwise calm waters of their relationship. He was planning a future, after all, a shared future. Now, lying in a sterile hospital bed, the truth began to seep in, cold and unforgiving. Sarah's absence was not an oversight. It was a choice, a deliberate void. 2 days after being moved out of intensive care, his mind clearer, his body still an unwilling prisoner of the bed, Mark requested his phone. His fingers, still clumsy, navigated to the banking app. The first thing that hit him was a flurry of notifications. Joint account alert, large withdrawal, then another and another. His breath hitched in his throat. He tapped the app open, his eyes widening in disbelief. The joint savings, every single cent they had painstakingly built over years, the wedding fund, the gallery dream, his entire life savings gone. The balance stared back at him, a stark, cruel zero. Each transaction was marked as transferred to external account, an account number he didn't recognize, a name conspicuously absent. He tried calling her, his thumb trembling over her contact. Straight to voicemail. He called again and again. Nothing. Finally, he typed out a message, his thoughts racing, his heart pounding in his ears. "Sarah, what's going on? Where's the money?" Her reply came an hour later, a short, clipped message that felt like a surgical incision to his soul. "I'm sorry, Mark. I can't do this anymore. I've moved on. I'll send the divorce papers soon." Divorce papers? He stared at the words, a bitter, disbelieving laugh bubbling up from his chest. They weren't even married. The audacity, the cold calculation of it, struck him like a physical blow. His heart didn't just break. It shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The accident had broken his body, leaving him vulnerable. But her words, her actions, they reached deeper, systematically dismantling his spirit. The nurses, observant as ever, noticed the sudden shift in his demeanor. "Is everything okay, Mark?" one asked softly, her brow furrowed with concern. "Just some family business," he mumbled, turning his face to the wall, shame and fury warring within him. But then, amidst the crushing wave of pain and betrayal, something shifted inside him. The thick fog of medication and despair began to clear, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. His father, a no-nonsense man who had built his life on integrity and foresight, had always told him, "Mark, prepare for the worst, hope for the best, trust your gut." And he truly had. 6 months before the accident, during that period of unsettling offness with Sarah, a quiet alarm had gone off in his gut. Nothing he could pinpoint, no concrete evidence, just a persistent, nagging feeling that something wasn't right. It was the photographer's intuition, perhaps, an innate sense of dissonance. So he'd made some moves. Discreetly, he'd updated his will, specifically naming his sister, Emily, as his sole beneficiary for all financial accounts and property, including the life insurance policy he'd recently taken out. A policy ironically meant to protect Sarah if anything ever happened to him. He'd even changed the security questions and passwords on all his personal accounts, just in case, citing a recent cybersecurity scare he'd read about online. It was a vague, easily accepted excuse. Now, that quiet foresight was his only lifeline. He called Emily, his sister, from the hospital phone, his voice still a little hoarse from disuse. "Hey sis," he rasped. "Can you do me a huge favor? Check my separate investment account and look for a recent beneficiary change form. And also, see if you can get access to any joint account statements." A few minutes later, Emily called back, her voice tight with concern. "Mark, what's going on? I see a ton of activity on the joint account. All outflows. And yes, your personal accounts, the beneficiary forms, they're all there, just like you set it up, everything's in my name." "Why? What happened?" "Because," Mark replied, his voice devoid of emotion, "Sarah just tried to steal everything I own, while I was in a coma." Sarah, it turned out, knew nothing about any of Mark's quiet preparations. She had been living in a bubble of self-serving delusion. She thought she was being clever, meticulously dismantling their shared life while Mark was incapacitated, presuming him a passive, unaware victim. Emily, bless her methodical nature, quickly sprang into action. While Mark lay recovering, Emily, fueled by a protective fury, began to dig. She tracked the suspicious bank transfers, scoured Sarah's increasingly public social media profiles, and meticulously checked property records. The picture that emerged was sickeningly clear. Sarah hadn't gone on a retreat or visited a sick aunt, as she had vaguely told Mark before his accident. She was on a lavish, sun-drenched vacation in Cabo, Mexico, with her new boyfriend, a slimy real estate developer named Chad. His face, unfortunately, was familiar to Emily from local news segments that occasionally highlighted his involvement in dubious land deals and shady property flipping. Sarah and Chad were posting photos, oblivious, broadcasting their ill-gotten gains to the world, assuming Mark was still lying in a hospital bed, helpless and unaware. The divorce papers Sarah had mentioned in her chilling text? Emily located them too. Sarah, it seemed, had attempted a brazen maneuver. She had forged Mark's signature on a document attempting to transfer the deed of their loft apartment solely into her name, citing spousal abandonment. A cruel irony given Mark's coma. She was planning to sell it off quickly, presumably with Chad's help, capitalizing on Mark's perceived incapacity. But there was a glaring problem. Mark's authentic signature was on the original deed, and he had never, under any circumstances, signed any transfer paperwork, and the notary public stamp on the fraudulent document looked suspiciously new for a transaction supposedly dated months prior. The details were sloppy, rushed, desperate. Mark, now discharged from the hospital and beginning the long, arduous road to physical recovery at Emily's apartment, felt a simmering rage. His body might be healing, but the wounds to his trust ran deeper than any physical injury. He spent hours on Emily's couch, the faint ache in his leg a constant reminder of his vulnerability, while Emily presented her findings. Each piece of information, each photo of Sarah and Chad's smiling faces, fueled his resolve. This wasn't just a breakup. It was a calculated act of financial and emotional violence. Once he was physically strong enough to sit for extended periods, Mark wasted no time. He contacted his lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davies, known for her tenacity in complex fraud cases. Her office was in a sleek, modern building downtown. Mark sat opposite her, his bandaged leg propped on a stool, and laid out the entire sordid tale. He handed her the meticulously organized stack of documents Emily had gathered, bank statements highlighting the massive outflows, Sarah's callous text message, the suspicious social media photos, and the obviously forged deed transfer papers. His hospital discharge papers served as irrefutable proof of his incapacitation during Sarah's alleged actions. "She tried to take everything," Mark explained, his voice flat, devoid of the tremor of his earlier hospital days. "While I was in a coma. My life savings, my home, even my future." Ms. Davies, a woman whose expression was usually unreadable, allowed a flicker of genuine shock to cross her face. Her eyes narrowed as she absorbed the details. "Mr. Jensen," she stated, her voice low and firm, "this isn't just a simple case of a relationship ending. This is a clear attempt at grand larceny, identity theft, and serious financial fraud. Given your medical condition at the time, there's also an element of exploitation of a vulnerable individual." The elder abuse comment from Emily's earlier research echoed in his mind, though he was far from elderly. It underscored the heinous nature of Sarah's actions. Their first step was filing a comprehensive police report. Mark, accompanied by Ms. Davies, recounted the events to Detective Miller, a seasoned officer with a weary but sharp gaze. Initially, there was a touch of skepticism, the common assumption of a messy breakup. But as Ms. Davies presented the organized evidence, the timestamps on the transfers, the medical records confirming Mark's coma, the clear evidence of forgery, Detective Miller's expression shifted from detached professionalism to serious contemplation. "This is beyond a civil dispute, Mr. Jensen," the detective concluded. "This is criminal." Next, they went directly to the bank. The branch manager, a harried man named Mr. Henderson, listened nervously as Ms. Davies laid out the case. Mark watched as Mr. Henderson's face went pale when Ms. Davies, with precise clarity, detailed the forged transfer forms for the joint savings account and Mark's personal investment accounts, contrasting them with Mark's authentic signature on his driver's license and other official documents. The bank manager's alarm grew even greater when Mark provided proof of his physical state during the period the transfers occurred. The funds Sarah had transferred were immediately frozen, pending an internal investigation and coordination with law enforcement. It turned out Sarah had wired a significant portion of the stolen funds directly to an offshore account associated with Chad, a detail that now brought federal agencies, specifically the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, into the picture. The scope of the conspiracy was expanding rapidly. The FBI's involvement escalated the case dramatically. Agent Ramirez, a sharp-suited woman with an intense stare, and her partner, Agent Chun, took over the primary investigation. They confirmed that Chad was already on their radar, a known figure in a network of individuals suspected of similar property and financial scams, often targeting vulnerable individuals or those with complex financial situations. Mark's case, with its clear evidence of physical incapacitation during the fraudulent activities, provided a crucial piece of the puzzle, linking Chad to a pattern of systemic exploitation. The coordinated effort between Mark, Emily, Ms. Davies, the local police, and now the federal agents began to tighten like a noose around Sarah and Chad. Every piece of information, every document, every digital footprint was meticulously analyzed, painting an increasingly damning portrait of their calculated deception. As the net tightened, Sarah's desperation began to manifest in frantic, increasingly erratic attempts to contact Mark. Her phone buzzed relentlessly with messages, each one a desperate plea. "Mark, please. It's not what you think. Chad manipulated me. I didn't know he was doing this." Then, shifting tactics. "We need to talk like adults. Don't let this ruin everything we had." The irony of her invoking adult conversation, the very word she had used in her cold, impersonal breakup text, was not lost on Mark. He did not respond. His earlier emotional turmoil had hardened into a steely resolve. There was no room for sentimentality, only strategy. Mark, under the strict guidance of Ms. Davies and the FBI, maintained a stoic silence. He had learned that sometimes the most powerful response was no response at all. He focused on his physical therapy, on rebuilding his strength, and on assisting the investigation wherever possible. He spent hours with Agent Ramirez and Agent Chun, meticulously going over timelines, providing details about Sarah's habits, their finances, and even Chad's subtle influence he'd observed before the accident. The plan was set. Catch Sarah and Chad in the act of trying to complete their scheme. Mark, with Ms. Davies, met with the agents. Agent Ramirez explained they had enough probable cause for search warrants and arrests, but a live, in-progress capture would solidify their case for conspiracy. Emily's earlier finding about the forged deed transfer was key. The FBI knew Sarah and Chad were planning to finalize the sale of Mark's loft, using the fraudulent deed. On a cool, overcast Tuesday morning, the trap was sprung. Mark, positioned in an unmarked van with Agent Chen a block away from his loft, watched through tinted windows. Ms. Davies and Agent Ramirez were coordinating from a mobile command center nearby. Mark's loft, unbeknownst to Sarah and Chad, was rigged with hidden cameras and audio recording devices, legally installed by the FBI. He had given his consent, a painful but necessary intrusion into his former home. At precisely 10 a.m., a sleek black SUV pulled up in front of Mark's building. Sarah emerged from the passenger side, looking impeccably dressed, followed by Chad, who sported a confident, almost arrogant smirk. They entered the building. Mark felt a knot of dread and anticipation tighten in his stomach. This was it. Suddenly, Chad's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his eyes widening. "Daniel Spencer? From the other deals?" he muttered, looking confused. "Why is he calling now?" Agent Chun leaned forward. "Spencer is a known accomplice. This is good." As Chad answered the call, the real estate agent gestured to Sarah. "Ms. Miller, about that notary stamp. It looked quite new. And the date." Sarah cut him off, her voice suddenly sharp. "It's fine. Everything is legal. Just process the papers." At that precise moment, a prearranged signal from Agent Ramirez came through Chen's earpiece. "Go, go, go." The van doors burst open. Uniformed officers and plainclothes FBI agents swarmed the building entrance. Mark watched, his breath held, as Agent Ramirez and Agent Chun led the charge into his loft. On the tablet, he saw the sudden chaos. Sarah's jaw dropping, Chad's arrogant smirk dissolving into a look of panicked disbelief. The real estate agent looked as if he was about to faint. Seconds later, Sarah and Chad were being led out of the building, handcuffs glinting. Sarah's face was pale, tear-streaked, her designer clothes now looking absurdly out of place. Chad, belligerent at first, went quiet as Agent Ramirez read him his rights. Mark watched from the van, a profound sense of exhaustion washing over him. It wasn't anger he felt, not anymore. It was a cold, quiet satisfaction. Justice. The federal case moved with surprising swiftness, fueled by the overwhelming evidence Mark and Emily had gathered, coupled with the FBI's ongoing investigation into Chad and his associates. Chad, recognizing the gravity of the charges and the mountain of evidence against him, quickly took a plea deal. In exchange for a lighter sentence, he fully implicated Sarah and several other conspirators in what turned out to be a sophisticated, multi-state operation targeting vulnerable individuals, particularly those with significant assets or those experiencing life-altering events like serious accidents or deployments. He detailed how he scouted potential victims, how he used charm and manipulation to ensnare them or their partners, and how he facilitated the quick, fraudulent sale of their assets through a network of unscrupulous real estate agents and corrupt bank officials. Sarah, on the other hand, maintained a desperate facade of innocence. She claimed she knew nothing about Chad's larger scheme, portraying herself as a naive victim, swept up in his charm and cunning. She asserted that Chad had convinced her Mark was secretly hiding money, planning to leave her with nothing, and that the refinance, the forged deed transfer, was entirely his idea. She had just gone along with it, she insisted, blinded by love and fear. Maybe part of that was true, Mark conceded privately, a tiny, almost imperceptible corner of his heart still clinging to the Sarah he thought he knew. But either way, her actions had devastating consequences. Faced with Chad's testimony, the forensic analysis of her forged signatures, the irrefutable bank records, and Mark's own statement, Sarah's claims of ignorance crumbled. Her lawyer, a public defender assigned to her case, advised her to accept the settlement. She agreed to full restitution of the stolen funds, which, thankfully, the bank had successfully frozen, complete forfeiture of any claim to the loft apartment or Mark's assets, and a signed confession about the forgery. In exchange, Mark, with the advice of Ms. Davies and the FBI, agreed not to press separate criminal charges against her. They had their primary target in Chad. Sarah, though complicit, was a secondary player in the grander scheme. The FBI's focus was on dismantling the entire network. The process to formally sever their relationship, what Sarah had called divorce papers, was finalized a few months later. It was a clean break, no fault, no protracted arguments. All things considered, it was as peaceful an end as one could hope for after such a tumultuous ordeal. On the day the last of the paperwork was signed, Mark received a call from Agent Ramirez. "Mr. Jensen," she said, her voice carrying a rare note of satisfaction. "Chad Morgan was sentenced today. 8 years for fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. The others involved in his network are facing similar fates. We also confirmed your case helped us establish the pattern. Thanks to your detailed evidence, we've identified 11 other victims of his scheme across 3 states. Those families might actually get their money back because of you." "Thank you, Agent," Mark replied, a genuine sense of profound relief washing over him. "That means a lot." After he hung up, Mark sat on the small balcony of Emily's apartment, where he had been living during his recovery. He watched the sunset, thinking about those other families. Other men and women, perhaps, who had been in vulnerable positions, thinking their homes and their futures were secure, only to have them systematically stripped away. He hadn't planned on being the one to bring down Chad's entire operation. He had just wanted what was legally and justly his. But sometimes, things worked out in ways one didn't expect, weaving together individual injustices into a larger tapestry of consequences. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Mark, I never meant for things to end this way. I truly regret hurting you." He stared at the message for a long moment. There was nothing left to say. He didn't respond. A year later, Mark sold the loft apartment. Despite its happy memories, too much betrayal had stained its walls. It felt tainted, a monument to a life that no longer existed. He used the money to buy a small, charming gallery space in a quieter part of the city, away from the frantic energy of his old neighborhood. It was modest, but it was his. He named it Evolve, a testament to his own journey and the transformative power of art. He fully immersed himself in his photography again, focusing on abstract landscapes and urban decay, finding beauty in the imperfections and resilience of the world around him. He hosted exhibitions for up-and-coming artists, curated thoughtful collections, and slowly, painstakingly, rebuilt his life on his own terms. His physical recovery was complete, but the emotional scars, while faded, remained as a quiet reminder of his journey. Sometimes he thought about Sarah. He heard from Emily that she had moved back to her hometown, working a low-wage job, her once promising career in marketing having evaporated in the wake of the scandal. She was starting over, he supposed. Mark didn't hate her anymore. The searing anger had cooled, replaced by a quiet, almost detached understanding. She had made her choices, driven by greed and a shocking lack of empathy. And so had he. He had chosen to fight, to endure, and ultimately to rebuild. One evening, a letter arrived at his gallery. It was from a woman in Fort Worth, Texas. Her husband was a soldier deployed overseas when Chad and his network had tried to run their scheme on her. The FBI, as part of their closure process, had given her Mark's name as the key witness whose case had broken open the entire operation. "You don't know me," she wrote, her elegant script filling the page, "but you saved our home. Thank you. Thank you for fighting back when it would have been easier to just walk away, for standing up for what was right, not just for yourself, but for others you didn't even know." Mark read the letter twice, a warmth spreading through him that felt deeper and more profound than any financial restitution. He pinned it to the corkboard above his desk, a constant, tangible reminder. Some days, when the quiet of the gallery felt too vast, or the lingering shadows of memory too sharp, he would look at that letter. He would remember that something genuinely good, something profoundly impactful, had come from all the pain, the betrayal, and the struggle. Last he heard, Chad was still in prison, serving his time. The system, for once, had worked. As for Mark, he was finding his way forward, one quiet, creative day at a time, building something new, something that couldn't be stolen or forged or betrayed, something that was finally, truly, and purely his.